I stepped off the transit ring and immediately regretted every life choice that had led me back here, including the haircut I got on the way. The planet greeted me with a polite vibration under my boots, which I remembered was their version of a welcome mat, though it felt suspiciously like judgment. The customs gate scanned my bones, my memories, and a regrettable poem I once wrote in orbit. A soft chime announced that I was not carrying weapons, diseases, or good intentions. An administrative drone floated up and asked if I was visiting for business, tourism, or unresolved emotional catastrophe. I said tourism. It flagged the answer as optimistic. Time had passed differently here. Not slower or faster, just more smug about it. Towers pulsed with data, streets rerouted themselves mid-thought, and the planetary network whispered names I hoped it had forgotten, especially mine. Somewhere in that whisper was hers, and my internal translator kept pretending not to recognize it, like a cowardly friend at a party. I hadn't come with a plan. Plans had a habit of collapsing around her, like bad metaphors. I had come because guilt had finally achieved escape velocity. Also because my ship's AI threatened to lock me in the cargo hold if I didn't resolve the narrative arc. It had been reading too much human literature again. As I walked, I remembered the altar. That memory tried to play in high definition, but I downgraded it to something fuzzier, more manageable, like an old sitcom rerun where everyone makes terrible decisions, and canned laughter helps you cope. No laughter arrived, just the echo of what I didn't do. People recognized me, not with faces exactly, but with pauses. Conversations stalled, doors hesitated before opening. The network was checking its records and finding a footnote that read, "Oh yes, this idiot." I smiled like someone who had learned nothing and kept moving. A public notice flared in my vision, informing me that my presence had triggered several dormant protocols. One involved diplomacy, another involved historical reenactment, a third politely suggested I leave again. I muted them all. Courage, I had learned, was mostly selective deafness. I stopped at a vendor and ordered something that translated to comfort food. It tasted like accountability with a hint of spice. I laughed because the alternative was screaming, and this planet charged extra for that. Her name finally surfaced, unavoidable now, carried on the network like a weather alert. She was no longer waiting anywhere. She was convening, legislating, deciding. The woman I left at the altar had apparently taken that energy and used it to reorganize a civilization. That felt fair. A summons arrived, official and immediate. Mediation chamber, neutral ground. No weapons, no temporal tricks, no running. I checked the fine print for exceptions related to panic and found none. On the way, my translator offered jokes to lighten the mood. I declined. It played them anyway. One involved a black hole and a promise. I didn't get the punchline, but it hurt. When the chamber doors closed behind me, the silence felt engineered. This room had absorbed wars, treaties, and first contacts. It would now have to survive an apology delayed by several years and one interstellar misunderstanding. I waited. Somewhere beyond the wall, long ears would tilt, not in description but in memory, and I realized the scariest part wasn't facing her. It was finding out whether she still remembered me as the man she loved, or the punchline the galaxy never forgot. The chamber's clock refused to tick, which felt personal. I practiced apologies in my head, discarding each for being too poetic, too technical, or likely to start a trade embargo. I settled on honesty, then immediately reconsidered. Honesty had got me into this mess, along with fear and a deeply flawed understanding of commitment across species. A voice announced procedural guidelines. It warned against emotional escalation, unauthorized nostalgia, and spontaneous declarations of love. I asked if sarcasm was permitted. The system paused, consulted something ancient, and allowed it with conditions. I thought about leaving again. The exit glowed helpfully. My legs did not. They remembered how running had felt last time, light and easy and wrong. I stayed. When the doors opened on the other side, the air shifted in a way that suggested decisions were being made without my input. The network quieted like an audience sensing the first line of a play. I resisted the urge to wave. She entered without ceremony, which somehow made it worse. The space acknowledged her authority. I did not. I stood there with my hands empty, which was appropriate, since I had brought nothing useful with me except regret and a mildly defective heart. We looked at each other. The silence tried to become dramatic. I undercut it by clearing my throat too loudly. A warning flashed about acoustic hostility. I apologized to the room. She spoke first. She thanked me for returning something I had taken with me. I asked what. She said time. I laughed because I didn't understand and then stopped because I did. We talked. Not about the altar at first. About policy, about the weather systems I didn't understand, about how her people had learned to joke about catastrophe as a survival skill. I contributed by making a joke about human disaster management. It landed poorly, then better, then exactly where it was supposed to. Eventually, the altar arrived between us, not as memory but as consequence. I said I was afraid, she said she knew. I said I was sorry. She said that was late but not useless. The chamber hummed, satisfied with the data exchange. Outside, protocols rewrote themselves. Somewhere, a historian groaned. Somewhere else, my ship's AI celebrated quietly. When we paused, I realized this was only the beginning. Not forgiveness, not reunion, just the point where running stopped working. For the first time since I fled, the future didn't feel like a chase. It felt like a conversation I might finally be brave enough to finish. The chamber released us with a notice that further interaction was statistically risky and narratively inevitable. I made another joke. She almost smiled. That was enough to keep me here, feet planted, history watching, the galaxy holding its breath while we prepared to speak again. I left the chamber knowing I would return, not because I was summoned, but because for once I hadn't fled. The planet vibrated again under my boots, less judgment now, more curiosity. I decided to take that as progress or at least as mercy. Above me, the network resumed its whispering, revising its footnotes. I let it. Some stories deserved edits, even if the first chapter hurt to reread. I breathed out, counted to 10, and stayed. The future waited, impatient but present, and for once I did not disappoint it. I stayed. I listened. The galaxy noticed reluctantly. The next time I saw her, it was because the planetary calendar decided I had waited long enough. A notification appeared in my vision announcing a follow-up session, phrased as a courtesy and enforced like a law of physics. I considered pretending my translator had crashed, but it reminded me that lying to a civilization built on truth math carried penalties involving public poetry. I arrived early, which surprised everyone, including me. Waiting had become a skill here. Time bent politely around her schedule, not mine. When she entered, the room adjusted again, and I wondered if I should feel offended or relieved that the universe clearly had a favorite. She spoke as if we had merely paused a conversation not detonated 1 year ago. I tried to match her tone and failed slightly, which she noticed. She always noticed. She asked if I had slept. I said yes. My heart corrected me. She raised one eyebrow, and my translator briefly shut down out of solidarity. This meeting was not about apologies, according to the agenda. It was about context. She wanted to know what had happened inside my head when I didn't show up. I searched for a version of the truth that wouldn't sound pathetic. I failed again, but less impressively. I told her fear had arrived before commitment. I told her the galaxy suddenly felt very large and very serious. I told her humans were excellent at building engines and terrible at staying still when things mattered. She listened without interrupting, which was worse than anger. She responded by explaining what had happened after I left, not emotionally at first but practically. There had been negotiations, fallout, cultural damage control. Someone had written a satirical opera about the abandoned wedding. It was apparently still running. I apologized for inspiring art. She said it funded 3 hospitals. Humor slipped in sideways. She joked that leaving her at the altar had saved her years of wondering what kind of partner I would have been. I joked back that running away had taught me the exact distance between cowardice and light speed. The room logged our banter as de-escalation. We moved on to the thing neither of us said out loud, the bond that had almost been sealed. The science behind it was explained to me again, slower this time, as if I were a child or a malfunctioning device. 2 minds partially entangled. Not destiny, not magic, just probability given a push. I had fled before the equation finished solving. She admitted something then. The bond had not vanished. It had stabilized into something dormant, like a star that refused to collapse or ignite. I laughed nervously and asked if that meant we were still married in some obscure dimension. She said only on Tuesdays, and only if we were both very stupid. The political consequences surfaced next. My return had already caused speculation. Some wanted reconciliation. Some wanted spectacle. A few wanted to study me like a rare disease that traveled through space. She asked what I wanted. The question hit harder than any accusation. I said I wanted to stop running. The room flagged that as a statistically unreliable statement. She didn't. We took a break mandated by protocol and shared a drink synthesized to lower hostility. It tasted like calm regret. I told her that if humans had invented this, wars would have ended centuries ago. She said humans would have weaponized it. I conceded the point. When we resumed, she was sharper, more focused. Leader now, not almost bride. She told me plainly that forgiveness was not a gift, it was a process with checkpoints and paperwork. I said I was willing to fill out forms. She smiled despite herself, then reminded me that jokes did not equal progress. I surprised both of us by agreeing. We discussed the future in hypotheticals, which felt safer. Parallel timelines where I stayed. Ones where she left instead. Universes where the altar never existed and we met later, wiser and less dramatic. I asked which she preferred. She said the one where people learned. As the session ended, she told me something she had never said before. That when I ran, it hurt. That when she rebuilt herself, it hurt differently. That seeing me again did not undo either pain, but it didn't add to it either. That mattered. I stood unsure whether to leave or stay. The system made the decision by scheduling another meeting. Progress, it said. I thanked the algorithm. It warned me not to get attached to outcomes. As I walked out, I realized the jokes weren't just shields anymore. They were bridges, fragile but real. The galaxy still watched, impatient and curious. I was still afraid. But for the first time, fear wasn't driving. I sent my ship's AI a message saying I might be here a while. It replied with relief and a sarcastic emoji. I smiled, alone but steady, aware that this story was no longer about what I had done, but about what I would do next, one conversation at a time. The last meeting was not scheduled by the system, which was how I knew it mattered. She sent the invitation herself, brief and unencrypted, a small rebellion that made my translator sweat. The location was neither neutral nor ceremonial, which felt intentional. I arrived without rehearsed apologies, which was new, and without an exit plan, which was terrifying progress. She asked me to walk with her. The planet adjusted politely. I resisted the urge to comment on being escorted by someone who could legally rewrite my life with a gesture. We talked about ordinary things first, because we had learned that extraordinary topics behaved better when approached sideways. She asked about Earth. I told her it was still confused but trying. I said humans had finally accepted that the universe did not revolve around them. She asked how long that had taken. I said too long, then made a joke about us needing an intervention staged by aliens with better emotional software. She laughed, openly this time, and something in the network relaxed. It felt like a storm choosing not to happen. We stopped where the bond protocols could be accessed, not activated, just acknowledged. She told me the council had reached a decision. My presence had become a variable that refused to collapse. They wanted closure. So did she. So did I, though I was still learning what that meant. She asked me a question I hadn't expected. Not whether I loved her. Not whether I regretted leaving. She asked whether I trusted her to decide the outcome, even if it meant walking away. The answer came without calculation. I said yes. The word surprised me by not hurting. She explained the final option. The bond could be dissolved fully, cleanly, with no echoes or alternate Tuesdays. It would cost something intangible, a loss of probability that might have become joy or disaster. Or it could be redefined, not as marriage or destiny, but as a connection acknowledged and limited, a choice renewed deliberately. No alters. No pressure from species or symbols. Just consent, updated. I made a joke about finally reading the terms and conditions. She smiled and told me not to ruin the moment. I apologized and stopped talking, which might have been the bravest thing I'd done. We accessed the system together. It asked us to confirm identities, intentions, and emotional literacy. I failed the last one on the first attempt. She passed and waited while I tried again. No one rushed me. The galaxy apparently could wait. As the process ran, I felt the old fear stir, familiar and smaller now, like a bad habit losing relevance. I remembered the man who had run, light speed and empty-handed. I did not like him much, but I understood him. I forgave him quietly, which freed me more than I expected. The system asked for final input. She looked at me, not as a leader or a symbol, but as someone who had once stood on an altar and chosen hope anyway. I chose presence. I chose honesty without drama. I chose staying even when staying was complicated. The bond shifted. Not gone, not overwhelming, balanced. The room registered success and tried to celebrate. We shut it down. Some things deserved privacy. Outside, the consequences arrived more gently than predicted. The council accepted the outcome. The opera announced a final performance. My ship's AI asked if it should stop warming up engines. I told it yes, indefinitely. It replied with suspicious happiness. We stood together, not touching, not apart. She told me she did not need me to make up for the past. She needed me to show up for the future, imperfect and present. I told her I could do that. The system did not flag it this time.